Hello, my name is Ava Bishop, and this case study is about notorious serial killer Carl or Coral Eugene Watts, otherwise known as the Sunday morning slasher. Watts was active during the years 1974 to 1982, and although he only confessed to 12 murders, he hinted that he killed up to 80 people. Police believe him to be a suspect in over 90 unsolved cases. Carl Eugene Watts was born in Killeen, Texas, to Richard and Dorothy May. Richard was a few years older than Dorothy and was a private in the Army at Fort Hood. 3 days after Carl was born, the family moved to Colwood, West Virginia, where Carl's sister Yvonne was born 1 year later. About a year after Sharon was born, Richard left Dorothy and the children without any reason, so Dorothy moved her family up to Inkster, Michigan, where she worked as an art teacher and visited her mother in Colwood often. Carl loved visiting his grandmother, and while he was there, he developed a thick Appalachian accent, which made him pronounce his name as Coral. He liked the way his name sounded so much, he asked his mother to change it for him, and from then on, he was known as Coral. According to his grandmother, Coral enjoyed rabbit hunting with his grandfather and learned how to skin them. Coral struggled in school, put in long hours for his homework, which eventually paid off, and his grades got back up. However, in 1961, he and his sister were struck with meningitis, an inflammation of the membrane that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. Sharon recovered quickly and fully, but Coral suffered from a debilitating fever and was forced to stay in the hospital. While he was there, he was diagnosed with polio and was subjected to a painful and isolating hospital stay, which caused him to miss the entire 3rd grade. After that, his attention span dropped and his studies suffered as well. In 1962, Dorothy remarried to a mechanic from Detroit named Norman Caesar. He had 6 kids of his own before he married Dorothy, and after they married, they had 2 more. Now living in an extremely crowded household, an already quiet and introverted Coral was lost in the mix, and never truly adapted to having that many siblings. However, his sister Sharon claims that Coral was not violent or abusive, and their parents doted on him. Coral kept all of his problems to himself, and got his frustrations out through his love of sports, but at 15 years old, he was reading at a 4th grade reading level and didn't seem to care much for academics. That year, on June 25th, he had his first run-in with the law after he attacked a woman in her apartment while on his routine paper route. When he was arrested, he calmly said, "I just felt like beating someone up." Instead of juvenile detention, he was taken to Lafayette Mental Clinic, where he had sex for the first time, but didn't have much interest in girls. There, he was reported in having violent dreams about beating and killing women, after which he claimed to feel better. He showed no remorse for his attack, and a doctor said he was paranoid and struggling with homicidal impulses. The doctor also recommended outpatient treatment, so Coral went home and returned to Lafayette a few times for that said treatment. He graduated in 1973 and received a football scholarship for Lane College in Tennessee. After he severely injured his knee, he couldn't play football anymore and dropped out of college. 1 year later, he enrolled in classes at Western Michigan University, where he slacked off in class and his hatred of females grew. Watts' life of serious crime began with his attacks on Lenore Nazaki and Diane K. Williams in the last week of October 1974. During this phase of his killings, he is reported to have knocked on women's apartment doors, claiming to be looking for Charles, which is the name of one of his siblings. Nazaki offered to help Watts before he forced himself into her apartment and attacked her, choking her until she passed out. Williams reported the same experience, only she was able to get her phone and call for help, causing Watts to take off running. Williams spotted the type of car he drove, and both she and Nazaki were able to identify Watts in a police lineup. Watts was arrested and charged with assault and battery for both cases. Instead of staying in jail for 45 days, he chose to stay in the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital, where doctors claimed that Watts enjoyed staying there too much. Coral was diagnosed by one of the doctors to have antisocial personality disorder, but no other psychosis symptoms were noticed. After he was released, he was sent to another mental facility before being sentenced to county jail for 1 year for the assault and battery of Nazaki and Williams. He moved back to Inkster after his release from jail, and while he was in Michigan, there were 5 more attacks on women in Detroit with the same MO. The attacker would break into women's homes. They would wake up to a man standing over them with his hands on their genitals. From September 1979 to May of 1982, Watts allegedly commits over 30 murders and assaults while he lived in Michigan and in Texas. Over that period, he was married twice and lived in over 3 different cities. He was caught in the morning of May 23, 1982, after he attempted to murder roommates Melinda Aguilar and Lori Lister. While Watts had been hurting Lister, Aguilar, hands bound behind her back, escaped off of the balcony in her bedroom and alerted the neighbors of her attacker. Watts, realizing Aguilar escaped, fled from the apartment only to be confronted by police officers. Watts agreed to plead guilty to aggravated burglary and attempted murder of Lister and Aguilar in exchange for information about some of his murder victims. The judge found Watts guilty of committing burglary, and the burglary was committed with the intent to commit murder. He was sentenced for 60 years. The most infamous detail about the Sunday morning slasher case is the comment Watts made when investigators repeatedly asked him why he chose one victim over another. Watts had simply replied with, "She had evil eyes. I could see her eyes, and they were evil." This is a classic deflection tactic often used by serial killers. By painting their victims as evil or a menace to society, killers can justify their actions and shift the blame to victims for being sinful in the first place. Watts behaved in typical serial killer manner in the way that he often took a personal token from his victims, such as clothing or jewelry, and then burned them or threw them in the sewer. Killing the woman was not enough, according to Watts. He had to kill her spirit as well. However, unlike many popular serial killers, Watts had no interest in being known or getting caught, implying that his motivations were not for acclaim or attention, but solely because he hated women. Despite being checked into multiple mental health clinics, most of the doctors agreed that Watts was not suffering from any mental illness or psychosis, only that he had homicidal impulses and potential antisocial personality disorders. Watts is reported to have no remorse or guilt for attacking and murdering the innocent women. Instead, he was reported to have had dreams in which he beat and killed women, and he claimed he felt better after having those dreams. Part of the reason why Watts believed only women to be evil could be due to his homosexual tendencies. Watts never showed any interest or desire towards women or being intimate with women, going so far as to say he believed sex was a wicked behavior. Even his wife, Valeria Goodwill, reported that after intimate encounters, Watts would get up and leave and be gone for hours at a time. It's possible he felt a deep sense of self-loathing that could only be mended by giving in to his homicidal urges. There is also a tendency for serial killers to be motivated by sexual fantasies, often going after victims that they don't believe would give them a chance romantically or sexually, and then raping them. None of Watts' victims were raped or violated in any way. He killed as if it was his job to rid the world of evil women, quickly and efficiently. Although Coral Watts did not have an overtly unusual or unhappy childhood, there are some warning signs that could explain his behavior later in life. According to Travis Hershey's concept of social control theory, the more social capital a person retains, the more likely they are to comply with society's rules and expectations, meaning there is a decreased likelihood of delinquency or criminal behavior. Social capital refers to the relationships an individual forms with the people around them to create strong senses of commitment, trust, and obligation to others in society. People with strong social ties and good relationships with their social institutions are more likely to feel shame in the face of doing something wrong, whereas those who experience some form of neglect or maltreatment are more likely to blame others for their behavior rather than feel guilty. Watts lost his biological father at a young age, and from then on, his mother was a single working mom of 2 kids who likely didn't have a lot of time with her children. Although this is only a mild case of possible neglect, it's still likely that this was damaging to Coral's level of social capital with his parents. There was also the bout of meningitis that debilitated Coral as a child. His illness caused major setbacks in an academic career, holding him back a grade and allegedly affecting his memory. It is often found that children who do poorly in school are less likely to get along with their peers, and thus damages the social capital that comes from both the educational institutions and social institutions. Coral is known to have not cared about school by the time he was 15. Coral's homosexuality would be the final nail in the coffin in terms of lack of social capital. While most people age out of delinquency and crime due to maturing and making their own families, Watts was once again at a disadvantage. His lack of attraction or interest in women likely prevented him from creating strong connections with his spouses, and his hatred of women likely led him to resent them. Due to his lack of social capital in every social institution, Coral likely felt no obligation or loyalty to anyone, allowing him to kill freely and without consequences. His inability to take responsibility for his own actions is shown through his victim blaming and the fact that he took every chance to stay out of prison, instead of feigning insanity so he could stay in mental hospitals. His inconsistency at his jobs shows lack of commitment to trying to create a better future for himself, as if all he cared about was killing women. Even when faced with 60 years in prison, the only sentiment Carl had to share was, "If I ever get out, I'm going to do it again." And that was my presentation. Thank you so much.